Here's something the garden industry doesn't advertise. You've probably been losing hundreds of dollars every spring without realizing it. The numbers tell a clear story. The average home gardener drops somewhere between $300 and $600 each April loading up on flowering plants that are fundamentally programmed to die the moment cold weather arrives. Every last one of them, dead by October. And come the following April, you're right back at that register, wallet open, doing the whole thing over again. That cycle ends today. There are 9 perennial flowers that you put in the ground a single time, and they return every year, not just surviving, but actually improving. Bigger root systems, more blooms, stronger structure with each passing season. Some of the plants we're covering today will still be flowering in your garden half a century from now. Stick with me through this entire list, because plant number 6 is going to completely reframe the way you look at garden design. Perennial number 1, Black-Eyed Susan. Black-Eyed Susan is one of the most visually commanding plants available to American gardeners. The flowers carry bright golden yellow petals surrounding a rich, deep chocolate brown center, a color contrast that doesn't whisper. It announces itself from across the yard. That combination photographs beautifully and holds its saturation even through the kind of intense afternoon heat that strips the color from lesser plants. Growth habit is upright and confident, reaching 2 to 3 feet tall with enough structural presence to anchor a bed without requiring staking or any kind of support. Most perennials give you 4 to 6 weeks of flowers if you're lucky. Black-Eyed Susan blooms from late June straight through October, for solid months of color running through peak summer and carrying well into fall, when most of your other plants have already called a season. In many parts of the country, you'll still be cutting fresh flowers from these plants when the first light frost arrives. Sun requirements are straightforward. 6 hours of direct sunlight daily, minimum. Soil requirements are almost non-existent. Poor soil, clay soil, sandy soil, compacted soil that other plants refuse to touch. Black-Eyed Susan handles all of it without complaint. Soil pH of 6.0 to 7.0 covers the natural soil chemistry of a vast majority of American gardens without a single amendment. And once established, which takes roughly 1 full growing season, this plant is genuinely drought tolerant. Travel during summer, forget to water. Go through a dry regional stretch. It keeps blooming through all of it. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9, covering everything from Minnesota and Maine down to Texas and Florida. Here's what makes this plant a genuine long-term garden investment beyond just its own flowers. It self-seeds freely, generously, and without any involvement from you. Leave the seed heads standing through fall and winter, which you absolutely should. And those seeds drop into the surrounding soil and germinate the following spring. Your original planting quietly expands outward on its own, filling bare ground and producing entirely new plants you never paid for and never planted. And while those seeds are waiting to drop, goldfinches and sparrows are clinging to those stems and feeding from the seed heads through January and February, when every other food source in your yard has disappeared. Zone 8 and 9 gardeners, deep south, southwest, parts of Southern California. Site your Black-Eyed Susans where they receive some relief from afternoon sun. Morning light plus afternoon shade in those regions extends the bloom window and prevents heat stress during the most brutal weeks of July and August. The care mistake most people make with this plant is removing every single spent flower in the name of tidiness. Don't. Deadhead some of them, the easily accessible ones, to push continued bud production. But leave a substantial portion of those seed head standing. They are not dead flowers. They are next year's free plants and a winter food pantry for the birds in your yard. A garden that supports wildlife in every season is a garden that stays alive even in the coldest months, and Black-Eyed Susan delivers that without asking anything extra from you. Perennial number 2, Salvia. Stop before we go any further, because there is a critical distinction to make here. If you've purchased salvia at a garden center and watched it bloom for a few weeks before declining, what you bought was not this plant. Annual salvia is a completely different species. The perennial salvia we're covering right now blooms not once, not twice, but 3 separate times in a single growing season, and then comes back and does the entire thing again next year and every year after that. Perennial Salvia produces deep violet to purple flower spikes on strong upright stems, growing 18 to 24 inches tall. The color is among the most saturated, jewel-toned shades of any perennial on the market. It does not fade in heat. It does not wash out in direct sun. It holds that rich, intense purple from the moment the flowers open until you cut it back. Compact mounding growth makes it ideal for the front or middle of any border. Tidy enough to look intentional. Substantial enough to create genuine visual impact. The bloom cycle is what sets this plant apart from almost everything else available to home gardeners. First bloom arrives in late spring. Cut it back hard, down to 4 to 6 inches from the ground. And within 3 weeks, a fresh set of stems emerges, and a full second flush follows in midsummer. Cut it back again after that fades, and many plants will push a third round of bloom in early fall. 3 complete bloom cycles from one plant in one season. No other commonly available perennial delivers that level of return for the space it occupies. Full sun, 6 or more hours daily. Well-draining soil. This plant does not tolerate standing water or consistently wet conditions. pH range of 5.5 to 7.0. Highly drought-tolerant once established. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 8. Perennial Salvia is also genuinely deer-resistant. Not in the vague sense of deer occasionally leaving it alone, but reliably, consistently resistant. The aromatic foliage that smells appealing to you is deeply unattractive to deer. If you garden in zones 5 through 7 across the Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, or Northeast, and you've been losing plants to deer pressure, Perennial Salvia gives you that rich, saturated color without the heartbreak of watching it disappear overnight. Perennial number 3, Coneflower. There is a plant growing in American gardens right now that native communities relied on medicinally for centuries before a single modern garden center ever opened its doors. It simultaneously draws monarch butterflies, swallowtail butterflies, goldfinches, and bees across 4 straight months of bloom, without deadheading, without fertilizing, and without any special care. It does all of this in soil that would kill most other flowering plants outright. That plant is coneflower, and if it isn't in your garden yet, that changes today. Coneflower produces distinctive flowers with swept-back petals surrounding a raised dome-shaped center that starts green, deepens to bronze, and becomes increasingly architectural as the season progresses. The color range available today extends well beyond the original purple. Warm orange, deep red, soft pink, pure white, golden yellow, rich magenta. Every one of those colors works in nearly every garden setting because the raised central cone gives each variety that same unmistakable silhouette that reads clearly from a distance and holds its visual interest even after the petals drop. Height ranges from 2 to 5 feet depending on the variety. Shorter compact forms for the front and middle of borders. Taller varieties for the back where they create genuine structural presence. Bloom window runs from July straight through October, for months through the heart of American summer and deep into fall when color becomes genuinely precious. Full sun to light shade. Tolerates clay, sandy, and poor unamended soil. pH of 6.0 to 7.0. Moderate drought tolerance once established. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9, the same exceptional coverage as Black-Eyed Susan, reaching virtually every gardener in the continental United States. The seed heads that form after the petals drop in late summer carry more ecological value than the flowers themselves. American goldfinches, those brilliant yellow birds that vanish from many yards in late summer, are pulled back specifically by coneflower seed heads. They cling to the dried stems and feed directly from the seed cones through fall and straight through winter. Cut your coneflowers down in fall cleanup, and you've removed one of the most critical winter food sources available to the birds in your yard. Leave them standing. Every single one. The dried seed heads with frost on them in January are genuinely beautiful, and the wildlife activity surrounding them through the coldest months keeps your garden feeling alive in a way that a neatly cleared bed never will. The care mistake that costs most coneflower growers their best results is cutting the plants to the ground in fall rather than waiting for early spring. Leave the full plant structure standing through winter. The stems protect the crown from the repeated freeze-thaw cycles that cause more winter damage than cold temperatures alone. Cut back in late February or very early March after the worst of winter has passed and before new growth begins pushing up from a base. That timing maximizes wildlife benefit through winter and maximizes plant health heading into spring. Perennial number 4, Daylily. This next plant is growing in abandoned lots across America right now. Along roadsides nobody maintains. Around the foundations of houses that have sat empty for years. Nobody is watering it. Nobody is feeding it. Nobody is doing a single thing for it. And it returns every spring and blooms with the same reliability and the same beauty it delivered the very first year it was planted. That is the most honest description of how tough a daylily is. And when you give this plant even basic attention, the right location, decent soil, occasional division, it repays that investment with a performance that will genuinely surprise you every summer for the rest of your gardening life. Daylilies produce trumpet-shaped blooms covering nearly the entire color spectrum. Orange, yellow, red, pink, burgundy, lavender, cream, and complex bicolors that combine 2 or 3 of those shades in a single flower. True blue is the one color daylilies don't offer. Everything else exists somewhere across the thousands of named varieties available to American gardeners today. Each individual flower lasts exactly 1 day, which is where the name originates. But each flowering stem carries multiple buds that open in sequence over several weeks. While one flower closes, another opens. The display is continuous rather than a single spectacular burst followed by nothing, which means an established clump delivers weeks of color from a single plant. The grass-like foliage that remains after the bloom period is dense enough to actively suppress weeds in the surrounding soil, meaning daylilies are working for your garden even during the weeks they aren't flowering. Height ranges from 1 to 4 feet depending on variety, with full sun to partial shade tolerance, making them among the most placement-flexible perennials available. Soil pH 6.0 to 6.5, moderate water needs. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 10, the widest hardiness range of any plant on this entire list. If you are gardening anywhere in the continental United States, daylilies will survive your winters. A single clump planted this spring will double in size every 2 to 3 years as the root system expands and generates new growth. Within 5 years, that one original plant contains enough material to divide into 8 to 12 individual plants, each of which can be replanted throughout your yard or shared with neighbors and family at no cost. The initial purchase price of one plant, typically $8 to $15 at a garden center, becomes effectively zero over time because you are continuously generating new plants from the original investment. Division is also what keeps daylilies performing at their peak. When a clump becomes overcrowded, usually every 3 to 5 years, the center begins producing fewer flowers while the outer edges remain vigorous. That's your signal. Dig up the entire clump in early spring or early fall. Use a sharp spade to separate it into sections of 3 to 5 fans each and replant immediately. Each division will establish quickly and bloom the following season. Delay division too long, and you get declining flower production from a plant that is fully capable of spectacular results. It simply needs more room than you've given it. The single care mistake that costs daylily growers the most is removing the foliage immediately after bloom ends. Leave it in place through fall. Those leaves are actively photosynthesizing after the flowers are gone, pulling energy back into the root system and building the reserves that fuel next year's display. Cut the foliage back after the first hard frost, not before. Every week of foliage you remove early is energy that never makes it to the roots. Perennial number 5, garden phlox. If you've ever walked past a summer garden at dusk and suddenly stopped because a fragrance stopped you in your tracks, something rich, sweet, and unmistakably floral, there's a strong chance what you were smelling was garden phlox. This plant produces a scent powerful enough to carry across an entire yard on a warm July evening. And the flowers, creating that fragrance, are among the most visually impressive of any summer perennial available to American gardeners. Garden Phlox produces large rounded flower clusters in shades of deep pink, soft pink, white, lavender, red, and bicolors that pair a colored edge with a contrasting center eye on each individual floret. Those clusters are substantial, often 6 to 8 inches across on established plants, sitting atop stems that grow 3 to 4 feet tall. This is a back-of-border plant. It creates genuine vertical presence and commands the eye from the moment it comes into bloom in July, carrying that display through September when temperatures are at their peak and many other perennials have already retreated into their late-season holding pattern. Full sun, 6 hours minimum. More is better. Moist, well-draining, fertile soil. pH 6.0 to 7.0. Consistent moisture through the growing season. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 8. The ecological value of garden phlox that most gardeners overlook when selecting plants. It is one of the most powerful hummingbird attractants available in zones 4 through 8. The tubular structure of the individual florets, combined with the color range, particularly the pinks and reds, is precisely what hummingbirds are biologically built to feed from. An established planting in full bloom from July through September draws hummingbirds reliably and repeatedly through peak activity season and right through their fall migration southward. If you've been trying to attract hummingbirds with feeders and not quite getting there, plant garden phlox. The flowers are more consistent than any feeder because they're always available and always fresh. The care technique that makes the biggest single difference in garden phlox performance is one that most gardeners resist because it appears too aggressive. In spring, when new stems emerge from the base, thin them down to 5 or 6 of the strongest, most vigorous per clump. Remove everything else. Cut it straight to the ground. More stems feels like more flowers. What overcrowded stems actually produce is poor air circulation and powdery mildew, the white, dusty fungal coating that is the most common problem with garden phlox, and the one that makes plants look terrible by August. 5 strong stems with good airflow between them deliver healthier plants, larger flower clusters, and a significantly longer bloom period than 15 crowded, weak stems ever will. Thin aggressively in spring, and garden phlox performs at a level that makes it one of the standout plants in your entire yard. Perennial number 6, Russian sage. Russian sage produces silvery white aromatic stems completely covered in tiny lavender blue flowers from midsummer through fall. The overall visual effect is an airy, luminous cloud of blue-silver color that moves in the slightest breeze and catches afternoon light in a way that appears almost iridescent. Growing 3 to 5 feet tall, it creates the kind of dramatic vertical presence and sophisticated garden backdrop that most home gardeners spend years trying to achieve. And it blooms from July all the way through the first hard frost, making it one of the longest blooming, latest season perennials available to American gardeners. Full sun. This plant demands it completely and rewards it fully. Poor to average, well-draining soil. Do not enrich it. Do not amend it with compost or fertilizer. Soil pH 6.0 to 8.0. One of the most alkaline-tolerant ranges on this entire list, making it genuinely valuable for gardeners in the West and Midwest, where naturally alkaline soils make growing many flowering perennials difficult. Extremely drought-tolerant once established. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 9. Here is the fact about Russian sage that completely reframes how you should approach growing it. And it's the fact that explains why so many gardeners purchase this plant, place it in their best-prepared garden bed, and then wonder why it looks floppy and underwhelming rather than the dramatic specimen they saw in every photo. Russian sage thrives in poor soil. Not average soil, poor soil. Lean, dry, unamended ground. The plants you see performing magnificently in professional landscape settings. Those towering 4 and 5 foot specimens with perfect upright structure and massive quantities of bloom are almost universally growing in soil that has never been enriched, fertilized, or heavily amended. Plant Russian sage in rich, fertile, heavily composted beds, and it channels all of its energy into producing lush, soft growth that cannot support its own weight. Floppy stems that need staking, reduced bloom, exactly the opposite result you're after. Put it in your worst, leanest, most neglected soil and watch it perform at its absolute best. For gardeners in zones 8 and 9 across the south and southwest, this plant is among your most valuable options. Russian sage handles sustained summer heat, genuine drought periods, and the brutal July and August conditions that eliminate most other perennials from serious consideration in those regions. In climates where the majority of flowering perennials struggle through summer, Russian sage is actively at its peak. Perennial number 7, bleeding heart. There is a spot in almost every American yard that defeats gardeners completely. The shaded area beneath a large tree. The north-facing side of the house, where direct sunlight never reaches. The dark corner between two structures, where nothing seems willing to grow, and everything you've tried has either limped along miserably or simply given up. You've probably stood in that spot, stared at it, and genuinely wondered whether anything beautiful could ever actually grow there. The bleeding heart was made for exactly that spot. This plant produces flowers so visually distinctive that most people stop and stare the first time they encounter it in bloom. Arching stems, graceful and gently weeping, hung with perfectly formed heart-shaped flowers in deep rose pink, each with a small white inner petal that drops below the heart like a single suspended teardrop. It grows 2 to 3 feet tall with a graceful, gently spreading habit. It blooms in April and May, arriving before most perennials have fully woken up, delivering spring color at the exact moment when gardeners are most hungry for it after a long winter. Partial to full shade. Moist, humus-rich, well-draining soil. pH 6.0 to 7.0. Consistent moisture, particularly through the spring flowering period. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9. Here is the critical piece of information that prevents the most common and most costly mistake made with this plant across the country. Bleeding heart goes summer dormant. In zone 6 through 9, as summer heat builds through June and July, the foliage begins to yellow, decline, and eventually disappear entirely. The plant vanishes. The ground looks empty. And every gardener who doesn't know this is coming assumes the plant has died and digs up the spot to replant. The plant has not died. The root system is completely alive underground, resting through summer heat exactly as it is designed to do. It will return on schedule the following spring with complete reliability. What you need to do is plan for the empty space it leaves behind. Pair bleeding heart with hostas, ferns, or other shade-tolerant perennials whose foliage expands and fills in through early summer, covering the vacated space and keeping that area looking intentional through the warmest months. One care note that applies across every zone. Do not disturb bleeding heart once it's planted and established. Don't move it. Don't divide it unless the clump has become genuinely overcrowded after many years. This plant develops a deep, specific relationship with the soil it grows in and performs best left exactly where you placed it. Choose the right location before you plant, the right shade exposure, the right moisture level, and then commit to it completely. Perennial number 8, Catmint. Catmint produces soft lavender blue flower spikes, rising above mounding, gray-green aromatic foliage. The overall effect is soft and billowing, a gentle cloud of blue lavender color that moves beautifully with any air movement and works harmoniously with virtually every other plant color in the garden. Height ranges from 12 to 24 inches depending on variety. Compact enough for the front of any border and substantial enough to make a real visual contribution. The foliage itself is attractive even between bloom periods, silver green, pleasantly textured, and aromatic enough that brushing past it becomes a genuinely sensory experience. Full sun to light shade. Well-draining soil, the one non-negotiable requirement, as catmint does not tolerate standing water or consistently wet conditions. Soil pH 6.0 to 8.0, an unusually wide and forgiving range that accommodates the naturally alkaline soils common across large portions of the Midwest and West without any amendment. Genuinely drought-tolerant once established, not just tolerant of briefly dry conditions, but capable of thriving through extended dry periods that would stress most other flowering perennials. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 8. Let's be clear about something that confuses many gardeners. Catmint is not catnip. They are related plants in the same family, but catmint, Nepeta mucinii specifically, does not produce the chemical compound that triggers the behavioral response in cats that catnip does. Your cats will not roll in it, destroy it, or seek it out. What Catmint will do instead is attract bees in numbers that will stop you in your tracks the first time you see it in full bloom. And that concentrated pollinator activity doesn't stay contained to the catmint. It spills over into every other flowering plant in your surrounding garden, increasing pollination rates and fruit and seed set across everything growing nearby. If you grow vegetables anywhere near your ornamental beds, catmint makes them meaningfully more productive. The care technique that delivers everything catmint is capable of is aggressive cutting back after each bloom flush. When the first flush fades in June, cut the entire plant back to approximately 4 inches from the ground. Not a light trim, cut it back hard. It will look severe for about a week. Then new growth pushes up from the base rapidly. And within 3 weeks, you have a fresh, dense mound of foliage. Within 5 to 6 weeks, a full second flush of bloom arrives, as rich and abundant as the first. Cut it back again, and you'll frequently get a third bloom period in early fall. 3 complete bloom cycles from May through September. Skip the cutback because it looks too drastic, and you get one weakening bloom period that fades into straggly, tired growth by July. The choice is yours, but now you know what that choice costs. Perennial number 9, Baptisia. This is the most underplanted perennial in America. Professional garden designers know about it. Botanical garden curators know about it. Horticulturalists know about it. The average American home gardener has never encountered it, never heard the name, and has no idea what they've been missing. By the time this section ends, that changes for you permanently. Baptisia produces tall, upright flower spikes of deep indigo blue, a true, saturated, remarkable blue that is genuinely rare in the flowering perennial world. In May and June, bridging the seasonal gap between spring bulbs and the main summer perennial bloom period. The flowers resemble lupins in structure, pea-shaped florets arranged in dense vertical spikes. But Baptisia is significantly tougher, longer-lived, and more adaptable than lupins across the range of American climates. The blue-green foliage that follows the flowers is dense, attractive, and weed-suppressing through the entire growing season, giving you a plant that earns its space every single month it's in the ground. After the flowers fade, the seed pods that form are unlike anything else in the perennial garden. Inflated, charcoal black, nearly architectural in their structure, rattling audibly in the breeze, and providing genuine ornamental interest through fall and into winter. Baptisia grows 3 to 4 feet tall and spreads to an equal width at maturity. A genuine structural anchor that creates the kind of permanence and authority in a garden bed that no annual flower can ever establish. Full sun to light shade. Average to poor, well-draining soil. Like Russian sage, Baptisia actively performs better in lean soil than in heavily enriched beds. pH 5.5 to 7.0. Drought tolerant once fully established. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9. Baptisia is a nitrogen fixer. Like beans and peas in the vegetable garden, it forms a symbiotic relationship with specific soil bacteria that allows it to pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and deposit it into the surrounding soil in a form neighboring plants can access and use. Planting Baptisia doesn't just add a beautiful, structurally significant perennial to your garden. It actively improves the soil chemistry in the surrounding bed over time, making growing conditions measurably better for every other plant within its root zone. You're adding beauty and improving your soil simultaneously with a single planting decision. The blue-green foliage that follows the flowers is dense, attractive, and weed-suppressing through the entire growing season, giving you a plant that earns its space every single month it's in the ground. After the flowers fade, the seed pods that form are unlike anything else in the perennial garden. Inflated, charcoal black, nearly architectural in their structure, rattling audibly in the breeze and providing genuine ornamental interest through fall and into winter. Baptisia grows 3 to 4 feet tall and spreads to an equal width at maturity. A genuine structural anchor that creates the kind of permanence and authority in a garden bed that no annual flower can ever establish. Full sun to light shade. Average to poor, well-draining soil. Like Russian sage, Baptisia actively performs better in lean soil than in heavily enriched beds. pH 5.5 to 7.0. Drought tolerant once fully established. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9. Baptisia is a nitrogen fixer. Like beans and peas in the vegetable garden, it forms a symbiotic relationship with specific soil bacteria that allows it to pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and deposit it into the surrounding soil in a form neighboring plants can access and use. Planting Baptisia doesn't just add a beautiful, structurally significant perennial to your garden. It actively improves the soil chemistry in the surrounding bed over time, making growing conditions measurably better for every other plant within its root zone. You're adding beauty and improving your soil simultaneously with a single planting decision. Baptisia takes 3 full years to reach its flowering potential. Year 1. It establishes its root system underground and produces modest top growth. Year 2. It grows larger but still doesn't deliver its full bloom display. Year 3. If you have left it completely undisturbed, haven't moved it, haven't divided it, haven't lost patience and dug it up, it produces a bloom display that will make every single day of waiting feel like the most worthwhile patience you've ever exercised in your garden. And then it repeats that performance the following year and every year after. Baptisia plants 20, 30, and 40 years old are documented across the country, still flowering reliably, still anchoring their gardens with the same structural presence established decades earlier, never having been replaced or significantly divided. Do not dig it up in year 2. That is the only instruction that truly matters with this plant. Leave it alone, give it 3 years, and it will give you the rest of its very long life in return. Soil preparation and planting. You can match every plant on this list to the correct zone, the right sun exposure, and the right spacing, and still fail entirely if you rush through this step or treat it as optional. Soil preparation is not the exciting part of gardening. Nobody films themselves amending beds and earns millions of views. But it is the single step that separates gardens that perform from gardens that disappoint. And it's a step most beginners underestimate and most experienced gardeners wish they'd taken more seriously earlier. Work your soil to a depth of 12 inches before planting any perennial. Not 6 inches. Not whatever depth your trowel reaches comfortably. 12 full inches. Perennial root systems go deep, and they need loose, uncompacted soil to do it efficiently. Roots that hit compacted ground at 6 inches stop growing downward and start circling. Circling roots produce unstable, drought-vulnerable, underperforming plants. Loose, deep soil produces the expansive, anchored root systems that make perennials the long-lived powerhouses they're capable of being. Work 3 to 4 inches of quality compost into the top 8 inches of that loosened soil. This single amendment does more for your garden than any fertilizer, any pesticide, or any other purchasable product. In clay soil, common across the Midwest, Southeast, and much of the Northeast, compost improves drainage and loosens the dense structure that suffocates roots. In sandy soil, common in the Southwest, Southeast, and coastal regions, compost improves water retention and gives roots something to grip. In average loam, compost feeds the soil biology that feeds your plants through slow, steady nutrient release across the entire growing season. Fall planting is ideal for perennials in zones 5 through 8. It allows root establishment before winter and produces earlier, stronger growth the following spring. Compost worked in at fall planting has all winter to fully integrate into the soil structure before those roots begin actively expanding. Spring planting? Amend immediately before planting rather than weeks ahead. Freshly amended spring soil has enough biological activity to begin benefiting roots almost immediately. Dig each planting hole twice as wide as the root ball and slightly shallower than its depth. The wider diameter gives roots immediate access to loosened, amended soil in every direction they grow. The slightly shallow depth is critical. The crown of every perennial on this list needs to sit at or just barely above the surrounding soil level. A crown buried even an inch too deep sits in conditions that promote rot, disease, and decline. When uncertain, plant slightly high rather than slightly deep. Natural settling will bring it down to the right level within a few weeks. Before placing any plant in its hole, loosen the root ball with your fingers, particularly if the plant has been in its nursery container long enough for roots to begin circling the bottom. Roots growing in a circular pattern inside a container will continue that circular pattern after planting unless you physically redirect them outward. 60 seconds of loosening and spreading those roots before the plant goes in the ground directly determines how quickly and how extensively that plant establishes in its new location. Water deeply and slowly immediately after planting, not a quick surface spray, but a slow, thorough soaking that penetrates the full depth of the root ball and surrounding amended soil. For the first 4 to 6 weeks, water once weekly if rainfall doesn't provide it. This is the establishment window. The root system is actively expanding into surrounding soil during this period, and consistent moisture is what enables that expansion to happen at the rate the plant needs to be ready for its first winter or its first summer heat. After that establishment window closes, transition to deep and infrequent watering, once every 10 to 14 days during dry periods, delivered slowly enough to penetrate 8 to 10 inches into the soil. Deep watering trains roots to grow downward toward reliable moisture rather than staying near the surface, where they're vulnerable to drought and temperature extremes. Surface-watered perennials have shallow root systems that struggle through summer. Deep-watered perennials have the extensive, anchored root systems that make them genuinely drought-tolerant. Mulch 2 to 3 inches deep around every plant after planting. Mulch suppresses competing weeds, moderate soil temperature through both summer heat and winter cold, and slows moisture loss during dry periods. But maintain one absolute rule. Never pile mulch directly against the stem or crown of any plant. Leave a clear, unmulched circle 2 inches wide around the base of every plant. Mulch piled against stems traps moisture against the crown, creating the persistently damp conditions that promote crown rot and fungal disease, the two most common causes of perennial failure that gardeners blame on the plant when the actual cause is how they mulched it. Year-round care calendar. One of the most common reasons gardeners abandon perennials is not the plants themselves, and not even the soil prep. It's simply not knowing what to do at each point in the year, and either doing the wrong thing at the wrong time or doing nothing when something specific was needed. Spring, late February through April. Depending on your zone, cut back any stems left standing through winter down to 2 to 3 inches from the ground. New growth will already be emerging from the base by the time you do this in most zones. Divide overcrowded clumps of daylilies, coneflowers, catmint, black-eyed Susan, and garden phlox if they showed declining flower production the previous season, or if the center of the clump looks sparse, while outer edges remain vigorous. Early spring division before significant top growth develops gives each division the entire growing season to establish before its first winter. Apply a 1-inch layer of compost around every plant as a natural slow-release fertilizer for the coming season. Do not use high-nitrogen synthetic fertilizer on flowering perennials. High nitrogen produces lush, heavy foliage at the direct expense of flower production. Do not divide Baptisia, Russian sage, or bleeding heart. These three perform significantly better left completely undisturbed. Summer, June through August, deadhead coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, Salvia, and Catmint consistently to extend bloom periods and encourage continued bud production. Cut Catmint and Salvia back hard after each bloom flush. This is non-negotiable if you want their full multi-flush bloom potential. Water deeply during dry stretches, directing water at the root zone rather than overhead. Overhead watering on garden phlox specifically creates the leaf surface moisture that powdery mildew requires to establish. If mildew appears on garden phlox, improve air circulation immediately by removing some interior stems and switch to ground-level watering only. Fall, September through November, leave coneflower and black-eyed Susan seed heads standing completely for wildlife through winter. Cut back garden phlox, daylilies, and bleeding heart after the first hard frost signals the end of the growing season. Apply 2 to 3 inches of mulch over the crowns of perennials in zones 4 and 5 before the ground freezes. This insulation layer prevents the repeated freeze-thaw cycles that heave roots out of the soil and cause more winter damage than cold temperatures themselves. Do not fertilize anything in fall. Fall fertilization stimulates tender new growth with no time to harden off before frost, and that new growth is damaged or killed by the first hard freeze. Winter. Leave ornamental seed heads and structural stems standing for as long as birds are actively using them. Use quieter months to plan additions, divisions, or redesigns for spring implementation. Order new plants from mail-order nurseries in January and February. The selection available through mail order is significantly wider than most local nurseries carry, and the best varieties sell out long before most gardeners start thinking about spring planting. Bloom succession planning. Here is the planning error that even experienced gardeners repeat. They choose perennials based on what looks attractive at the nursery on the specific day they visit, which means they're selecting entirely based on what happens to be blooming on that particular day. The result is a garden that peaks simultaneously for 3 spectacular weeks, and then produces almost nothing for the remaining 5 months of the growing season. Bloom succession planning eliminates that problem completely. With the 9 plants covered today, you have everything needed to build a garden delivering continuous color from April through October without gaps. Bleeding Heart and Baptisia arrive first, April and May, delivering color at the exact moment when gardeners are most hungry for it after winter. The deep indigo of Baptisia spikes and the hanging rose-pink hearts of Bleeding Heart together create a spring display that bridges the end of bulb season and the beginning of the main perennial season without a visible gap. Salvia and Catmint enter their first flush in late May and June, carrying the garden forward from spring into early summer with rich violet-purple and lavender-blue color combinations. Their first flush overlaps with the tail end of Baptisia bloom, creating a seamless color handoff between the 2 seasons. Coneflower, Black-Eyed Susan, Daylily, and garden Phlox define the midsummer peak, July and August, when the garden is at its most active, its most colorful, and it's most alive with pollinator activity. These 4 plants together at peak bloom create the kind of summer garden display that makes visitors stop and ask questions. Russian sage carries the garden from late summer into fall, providing that luminous blue-silver presence at the exact moment when most summer perennials are winding down and the garden needs something to carry it gracefully toward season's end. Paired with Catmint's 3rd bloom flush and the ornamental seed heads of Coneflower and Black-Eyed Susan, the fall garden looks intentional and abundant rather than tired and depleted. Plant in odd numbers, groups of 3 or 5, rather than single specimens or pairs. Group plantings create the kind of naturally flowing drifts that read clearly from a distance and give the garden a designed quality that isolated plants never achieve. Shorter plants at the front, Catmint, Salvia, compact Daylilies. Mid-height plants in the middle, Coneflower, Black-Eyed Susan, standard Daylilies, Bleeding Heart. Taller plants at the back, garden Phlox, Russian sage, Baptisia. Repeat the same plants in multiple locations throughout a bed rather than concentrating everything in one spot. Repetition creates visual rhythm and makes a garden look planned and coherent rather than randomly assembled. Gardeners in zones 8 through 10 should shift this entire bloom calendar approximately 4 to 6 weeks earlier. Use the succession framework as your structural guide and adjust specific timing to match the reality of your regional climate. Where to start? If you've never grown perennials before and want to begin with a plant that offers the fastest establishment, the most forgiving growing requirements, the longest bloom window, and the most immediate visual return, start with Black-Eyed Susan or Daylily. Both tolerate poor soil. Both handle drought once established. Both multiply and expand on their own over time. Both produce months of color without demanding significant maintenance. And both will make your garden look and feel like a genuinely thriving space, even in your very first season. If you've been gardening for years and want to add plants that will fundamentally change the structure, depth, and long-term character of your garden, plant Baptisia and Russian sage this season. Give Baptisia the 3 years it needs without interruption. Put Russian sage in your leanest, driest, most neglected soil and don't enrich it. Both will reward your patience with a presence and permanence that no annual flower and no short-lived perennial can ever create. And if you want a garden that produces something beautiful for pollinators, for birds, for wildlife, and for your own eyes every single month from April through October without requiring constant replanting or daily attention, build your plan around all 9 of these plants together using the bloom succession framework. That combination gives you color in every season, wildlife value in every season, and a garden that gets genuinely better, fuller, and more beautiful every single year you leave it in place. Plant them once, invest the effort in that first establishment season, and then step back and watch what your garden becomes.